The town of Nsinda was quiet that morning, though the streets were filled with people dressed in black. Mr. Camau, one of the most respected businessmen in the region, was finally being laid to rest. His name carried weight. He had helped many families, built schools and created jobs. Old friends, business partners, neighbors and distant relatives came together, their faces heavy with grief. The sound of church songs filled the air, but beneath the prayers and hymns, whispers moved from mouth to mouth. All eyes turned toward the road when Madame Ifeananya, Camau's much younger second wife, arrived. She stepped out of a shiny black car, her heels clicking against the ground. Instead of the simple black attire expected at a funeral, she wore a fitted dress with glittering jewelry around her neck and wrists. A wide smile rested on her face, as though she was attending a celebration, not mourning her husband. People shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their heads in shame, others muttering under their breath. "Does she feel nothing?" an old woman whispered to her neighbor. Children clung to their mothers, staring at the woman who showed no tears. Near the front, Camau's first children sat together, their eyes red and swollen. They had come to bury their father, but now they also had to face the cold presence of the woman who had taken most of his attention in his final years. As the coffin was carried forward, the crowd grew silent, but the air was thick with judgment. Everyone saw Ifeanyanya's bold smile, and no one could ignore it. Njeri sat with her brothers, Oba and Kalechi, on the hard wooden bench, their eyes fixed on the coffin that held their father. The songs of mourning filled the air, but in their hearts there was more than just grief. It was pain, anger, and a quiet sense of betrayal. They had loved their father deeply, yet the man who once held them close had slowly drifted away after Madame Ifeananya came into his life. Njeri remembered the days when their father would come home early just to listen to her stories from school, laughing and patting her on the head. Oba remembered how his father used to take him to the marketplace, teaching him how to bargain, telling him that one day he would run the family business. And little Kalechi, the youngest, remembered evenings when their father carried him on his shoulders, calling him "my future leader." Those memories felt so far away now, buried under the cold distance that came after Ifeananya arrived. At first she had acted kind, smiling and pretending to care. But as time went on, everything changed. Their father's laughter around them grew rare. He spent more time locked in conversations with her, more money on her clothes and trips, and less attention on his children's needs. Njeri's school fees were delayed, Oba's requests to learn at his father's office were brushed aside, and Kalechi often cried himself to sleep, asking why Papa no longer tucked him in. The townspeople had noticed too. Rumors spread quickly in Nsinda, and people whispered that Madame Ifeananya now controlled everything. His businesses, his bank accounts, even the keys to the mansion. Some said she had charmed him, others said she had trapped him with her beauty and cunning ways. Whatever the truth was, the children only saw the result, their father slipping away from them, little by little, until his presence felt like a shadow. Sitting there at the funeral, they felt the weight of those lost years pressing down on them. Njeri clenched her hands tightly in her lap, her nails digging into her palm, fighting back tears of both grief and anger. Oba stared at the ground, his jaw set hard, refusing to let the tears fall in front of everyone. Kalechi leaned against Njeri, too young to fully understand, but old enough to feel the emptiness in his chest. As the crowd murmured about Madame Ifeanyanya's bold entrance and shameless smile, the children kept silent. They had nothing to say to her, nothing to say to anyone. But deep inside their hearts burned. They were mourning not just their father's death but the way they had lost him long before he was buried. And as they watched Ifeananya laugh softly with her friends even in the middle of the funeral, one thought settled in all their minds. She might have won their father's attention, but she would never erase the pain she caused his children. The air was heavy with sorrow as the coffin was lowered into the ground. The priest's final words echoed through the cemetery, and a soft wailing rose from the crowd. Dust swirled in the breeze, and people wiped their tears, whispering prayers for the soul of Mr. Camau. It was the moment of final goodbye, the moment everyone expected silence and respect. But then, cutting through the grief like a knife, came a sharp, bitter sound. Madame Ifeananya leaned slightly forward, her lips curling into a smile that seemed so out of place. In a voice just loud enough for those nearby to hear, she whispered with pride, "Finally, it's all mine." Her words struck like thunder. A gasp rippled through the mourners. People froze, their eyes widening, their mouths open in disbelief. Even the priest paused, his voice faltering for a second. The air shifted from sorrow to shock. Njeri's whole body stiffened. Her fists clenched so tightly that her nails dug into her skin, but she didn't care. Rage burned in her chest, hot and fierce, but she forced herself to stay still. Her father was being laid to rest. She wouldn't let this woman turn his funeral into a circus. Oba, sitting beside her, could only stare at Ifeananya in stunned silence, his lips trembling with words he couldn't say out loud. Kelechi hid his face against Njeri's arm, confused but sensing the disrespect. Around them, the villagers exchanged glances filled with disgust. Some shook their heads, whispering angrily to one another. "What kind of woman laughs at her husband's grave?" one old man muttered under his breath. Another woman hissed, "Shame on her. No respect for the dead." A group of young men clenched their jaws, their eyes following Ifeananya with open scorn. But Ifeananya didn't seem to notice, or perhaps she didn't care. She stood tall, her chin lifted, her expensive jewelry catching the sunlight. To her, this was not a day of loss but a day of victory. The house, the cars, the accounts, she believed they were all hers now. In her mind she had won, and she wanted everyone to know it. The sound of soil hitting the coffin brought the mourners back to reality. Each thud was heavy, final, and sacred. But in the hearts of many, Camau's memory was being overshadowed by his wife's shameless behavior. Some people turned away, refusing to look at her again. Others whispered prayers, not only for Camau's soul but for justice against the cruelty they had just witnessed. Njeri's eyes filled with tears, not only for the father she had lost but also for the humiliation of this moment. She made a silent promise in her heart. Ifeananya might think she owned everything now, but one day the truth would come to light. As the coffin disappeared beneath the earth, the mourners carried two memories with them: the love they once had for Camau, and the bitter laughter of the woman who dared to claim his life's work as hers. 2 days after the funeral, the small town of Nsinda buzzed with anticipation. People whispered in the marketplace, at the water well, and along the dusty roads. Everyone knew that today, Mr. Camau's will would be read. For the villagers, it was more than legal business. It was drama, and they wanted to hear every detail. By midday, a crowd had already gathered outside Lawyer Mbiel's office, pressing close to the windows, hungry for gossip. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The air felt heavy, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Njeri, Oba, and Kelechi walked in quietly, their faces tired, their clothes plain but neat. They did not expect much. After all, they had seen how their father treated Ifeananya in his final years. They sat together, shoulders brushing, leaning on one another for strength. Their eyes carried the same thought: whatever happens, we still have each other. Then came the sound of clicking heels. Ifeananya made her entrance as though it was a fashion show. She wore a shiny new dress, and around her neck hung a thick gold necklace that gleamed in the light. The smell of expensive perfume filled the room. She moved with confidence, smiling as if she already knew the outcome. Sliding into her chair, she crossed her legs, her jewelry jingling, her eyes darting toward the children with a mocking look. Lawyer Mbiel, an elderly man with gray hair and sharp eyes, cleared his throat. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the room full of expectant faces. Outside, villagers pressed closer, straining to hear through the wooden shutters. "We are here," he began slowly, "to read the will of the late Mr. Camau." His voice was calm, but even he could not ignore the tension that gripped the air. The children bowed their heads, preparing for the worst. Oba clenched his jaw, ready to accept that their father's wealth was gone from them forever. Njeri's hands trembled slightly in her lap, though she tried to hide it. Kelechi leaned against her, too young to understand every detail but old enough to sense the fear. Ifeananya, on the other hand, sat taller in her chair. She wore a smile that grew wider with every word, her mind already imagining herself as the new queen of Camau's empire. The house, the cars, the money, it was all hers, she believed. She looked at the lawyer as if she was just waiting for him to confirm what she already knew. Outside, whispers turned into soft chatter. "Do you think he left everything to her?" one woman asked. "What about the children?" another replied. Everyone leaned closer, eager to catch the drama about to unfold. And so, as the lawyer prepared to open the thick brown envelope, the room fell silent. It was the silence before a storm, the kind that made hearts pound and palms sweat. No one knew what words would come out next, but everyone knew they would change everything. The room was so quiet that even the sound of papers being unfolded echoed like thunder. Lawyer Mbeal adjusted his glasses, pulled out the official document, and began to read in a steady, serious tone. "I, the late Mr. Camau, being of sound mind, do hereby declare this as my last will and testament." The words were heavy, each one pulling the children's hearts deeper into fear. Njeri gripped her little brother Kelechi's hand tightly, her palms sweating. Oba leaned forward, his jaw clenched, bracing himself for what he already expected. Mbeal's voice carried through the office, and the villagers outside pressed closer to the wooden shutters, holding their breath. "To my wife, Madam Ifeananya Camau, I leave the family mansion, all vehicles registered under my name, and the primary bank account." Gasps filled the air inside and outside the room. The words cut through Njeri like a blade. She lowered her head, her lips trembling, tears stinging her eyes. Oba's fists tightened until his knuckles turned white. Kelechi's face crumpled in confusion. He didn't fully understand, but he could feel the despair settling over his siblings. Ifeananya, however, could not hide her excitement. A slow smirk spread across her face, her chin tilted proudly. She leaned back in her chair, letting her gold necklace glisten in the sunlight. Her eyes danced with victory as if she had just won a great prize. She didn't even bother to hide it. She crossed her arms, her smile widening at the sight of the children's pain. Inside her mind, celebrations had already begun. She imagined herself throwing parties in the mansion, driving Camau's sleek cars through the town, her bank account fat with wealth. She pictured herself as the queen of Nsinda, admired, envied, and feared. The humiliation at the funeral meant nothing now. She believed she had won. The villagers outside murmured to each other, some shaking their heads in anger. "So it's true," one whispered. "She has taken everything." Another spat on the ground, disgusted. That poor man's children, left with nothing. The anger spread like wildfire, but no one dared speak too loudly. Njeri swallowed hard, trying to be strong for her brothers, but her heart felt like it was breaking into pieces. Was this really Papa's final decision? She thought. Did he truly forget us in the end? Oba's chest rose and fell heavily. His eyes locked on the lawyer, hoping, praying that there was something more. But for now, all they could see was defeat. Ifeanyanya's smirk grew brighter, her laugh soft and sharp, echoing in the silence. She leaned toward the lawyer and whispered, just loud enough for the children to hear. "I knew it. It's all mine." The room felt colder. For the children, it seemed their worst fears had come true. For Ifeananya, it was the sweetest victory. And for the villagers, it was the perfect storm of sorrow and scandal, one they would talk about for years. For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Ifeananya sat tall, smiling proudly, her fingers tapping the arm of her chair as though she was already the queen of Camau's empire. The children sat broken, eyes lowered, hearts sinking deeper into despair. The villagers outside muttered angrily, some shaking their heads, others whispering prayers for justice. Everyone thought the matter was settled. But then Lawyer Mbeal cleared his throat. The sound was sharp, cutting through the thick silence. He shuffled the papers in his hands and pulled out a smaller brown envelope, sealed with wax. His expression grew serious. his eyes scanning the room slowly before he spoke. "There is one more clause," he announced. "A special instruction from the late Mr. Camau. This letter was not to be opened until after his burial." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Gasps rippled through the room, and the crowd outside pushed even closer, desperate to hear. Ifeanyi's confident smile faltered slightly, though she quickly masked it with a smirk. "Another clause," she scoffed, waving her hand. "Surely it doesn't change anything important." But her voice was thinner now, carrying a hint of unease. Beale broke the seal carefully and unfolded the handwritten note inside. The paper trembled slightly in his hands, though his voice was firm. "This," he said, "is in Mr. Camau's own handwriting." The children lifted their heads at once, hope flickering in their eyes. Jerry's heart began to race. Oba leaned forward, gripping the edge of his chair. Even little Kelechi, who had been slumped in sorrow, straightened up, sensing something important. Beale began to read. The words, though written in Camau's simple hand, carried the weight of truth and love. "To my beloved children Jerry, Oba and Kelechi," it said, "I know you have suffered. I know my choices hurt you. I saw the tears you tried to hide, the distance that grew between us. I am not blind to the greed of the woman I married. I regret the pain it caused you." Gasps filled the room. The villagers outside murmured, some covering their mouths in shock. Ifeanyi's eyes widened, her hand tightening on her necklace. Her confident posture slowly began to shrink. Beale continued reading. "The properties I listed earlier, the mansion, the cars, the accounts, are only temporary gifts to my wife for her upkeep. But my true legacy, my businesses, my farmland, my ancestral home, and my shares belong to my children. These are not to be touched by anyone else. They are yours to protect and to pass on." The room erupted. Some people clapped their hands in relief, others whispered prayers of thanks. The children's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow this time, but of shock and gratitude. Jerry covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. Oba's face lit with fierce pride, while Kelechi grinned through his tears. Ifeanyi sat frozen, her smirk gone, her body stiff with disbelief. Her world had just been shattered. The power she thought she owned was slipping from her grasp like sand. And for the first time in days, the children felt the weight in their hearts lift, replaced with a light that came from their father's final act of love. Lawyer Beale's voice grew firmer as he continued to read the handwritten note. The room was so quiet that even the creak of the old wooden chair sounded loud. Every ear was tuned to his words, every heart beating faster with anticipation. In addition to what has been stated, Beale read slowly, "I declare that the bulk of my estate, my business shares, my farmland and my ancestral home, shall belong solely to my children Jerry, Oba and Kelechi. These are my true wealth, the foundation of my name, and they must remain in my bloodline." The words struck like lightning. Gasps filled the office, bursting through the open windows to the villagers outside, who echoed the sound with even louder exclamations. Some clapped their hands together in disbelief, others shouted, "Ah, God is just." The energy in the air shifted from sorrow to shock, from silence to murmurs that spread like wildfire. Inside the room, Jerry pressed her hand against her mouth, her eyes flooding with tears. She could barely breathe, her heart pounding in relief. Oba sat up straighter, his chest rising proudly as though a heavy chain had just been lifted off his shoulders. Kelechi squeezed Jerry's arm, his face bright with a smile that had been missing for too long. The pain that had weighed them down seemed to break apart in an instant. Their father had not forgotten them. But Ifeanyi, her transformation was instant and brutal. The confident smile she had been wearing only minutes ago faded completely. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for some escape, some hidden line in the will that would undo what she had just heard. Her fingers gripped the edge of her chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Beale's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "As for my wife, Madame Ifeanyi," he read, "she shall keep the residence in which she currently lives, but it is not to be sold, rented or transferred. It is only for her shelter, nothing more. The room erupted again. Some laughed bitterly, others shook their heads in satisfaction. So she thought she had everything, a villager whispered from outside. But look, she has nothing but 4 walls she cannot even sell. The humiliation hung heavy in the air, and Ifeananya felt it pressing down on her like a storm. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The smirk that had danced on her lips earlier was gone forever. Her gold necklace no longer gleamed. Instead, it felt heavy like chains choking her pride. Her head bowed slightly, not in humility but in disbelief and rage. For the children the moment was almost surreal. Their grief was still there, but now it was softened by justice. They looked at each other with trembling smiles, tears rolling freely down their cheeks. Their father's last words had restored their dignity, their hope and their strength. And as the lawyer folded the will, the villagers outside broke into cheers. Camau's legacy had found its rightful heirs, and the woman who mocked his death was left stripped of her imagined victory. For a few seconds after Lawyer Mbeal finished reading, there was only silence. Everyone stared at Madame Ifeananya, waiting to see what she would do. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together. Then suddenly, like a fire bursting out of control, she exploded. "This is a lie!" she screamed, slamming her palm against the table so hard the papers shook. "You old man, you are twisting his words. My husband would never write such a thing. He promised me everything. Everything belongs to me." Her voice was shrill, filled with rage and desperation. The villagers outside gasped, pushing against the door and windows, trying to catch every word. Inside, the children sat frozen, watching the woman who had once looked so powerful now unravel before their eyes. Njeri gripped Oba's arm, her heart racing. Kalechi clung to her, frightened by the shouting. Ifeananya stood up, her chair screeching loudly against the floor. She reached across the desk and tried to snatch the documents from Lawyer Mbeal's hands. "Give them to me," she shouted, her gold bracelets jingling as she lunged forward. Mbeal quickly pulled the papers back, his old but steady voice rising. "Madam, control yourself. These are official documents. Do not disgrace yourself further." But Ifeananya was beyond reason. Her face twisted with anger, her eyes wild. "You all want to see me humiliated," she cried, pointing at the children. "They poisoned his mind. They turned him against me. This is not fair." By now, the crowd outside could no longer be held back. The door creaked open as villagers poured into the room, their eyes burning with judgment. Some shook their heads, others folded their arms in disgust. "Shameless woman," someone muttered. "To laugh at his funeral and now to fight over his will. Where is her respect?" A few women pushed closer, their voices sharp. "Did you not mock him in the graveyard?" one asked. "You thought we did not hear when you said, 'It's all mine.'" Another added, "You wanted to dance on his grave, but see now, God has exposed you." Ifeanyanya's chest rose and fell heavily, her confidence crumbling under the weight of the crowd's scorn. The villagers' eyes pierced her pride, stripping away the image she had built for herself. She looked around, but there was no ally, no friend, no admirer left. Even those who once envied her beauty and wealth now looked at her with pity, or worse, disgust. Lawyer Mbeal straightened the documents and spoke firmly. "The will is clear. There is nothing more to discuss. Mr. Camau made his decision, and it will be respected." Ifeanyanya's hands trembled, her voice breaking as she shouted one last time, "This is not over. I will fight this." But even as she spoke, no one believed her. Her words sounded weak, empty, and desperate. The children sat quietly, watching justice unfold in front of them. 4 years, they had endured her arrogance and cruelty. Now, in front of the whole town, she stood exposed, her pride shattered. What she thought would be her greatest triumph had turned into her greatest disgrace. The room slowly quieted after Madame Ifeanyanya's outburst. The villagers who had crowded inside now turned their attention to the children. For the first time in years, all eyes were not on Ifeanyanya's beauty, clothes, or wealth, but on Injeri, Oba, and Kalechi, the rightful heirs of their father's legacy. Injeri sat very still, her chest rising and falling as though she was trying to hold back the flood of emotions inside her. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time they were not tears of pain. They were tears of relief, of justice finally being served. She pressed her hands together and whispered softly, "Papa, you did not forget us." Oba straightened in his chair, his shoulders lifting proudly. He had carried bitterness in his heart for years, watching their father's love slip away and fearing that his future was lost. But now, with the farmland, the businesses, and the ancestral home placed back into their hands, he felt hope returning. He clenched his fist, not in anger but in determination. "We will not waste this chance," he thought. "We will rebuild everything he started." Little Kalechi, who had been silent most of the time, finally smiled. His small voice broke through the heavy air. "Papa still loves us." Those simple words melted the hearts of the villagers. Many of them nodded, some even wiping their own tears. It was true. Camau's final act had spoken louder than years of distance. The villagers began to cheer softly, their voices growing louder with each passing moment. "Justice has been done," one man shouted. "The children have their father's blessing," another added. The sound spread outside the office, where more people had gathered, and soon the whole street was alive with voices praising the decision. Neighbors stepped forward to encourage the children. An old woman touched Injeri's shoulder gently and said, "Your father's spirit will now rest in peace, my child. Honor him well." A group of young men patted Oba on the back, promising to help him restore the business. Even little Kalechi was lifted onto a villager's shoulders, the crowd clapping for him as though he were already a young leader. Ifyananya sat in a corner, ignored, her once bright face now clouded with shame. No one looked at her anymore. The glory she craved had slipped away. The spotlight now belonged to the children, the true heirs. As the villagers poured out into the street, they chanted praises for Camau's children. The once broken family now stood together, united in strength. Injeri wiped her tears and looked at her brothers. "We will honor Papa," she said firmly. "We will restore his name and use this inheritance to help others, just like he once did." Oba nodded, determination in his eyes. Kalechi squeezed her hand, smiling with innocence and hope. For the first time in years, the three siblings felt whole again. And as the cheers of the townspeople surrounded them, they knew in their hearts that their father was smiling from beyond. Finally at his. Months passed, and life in Sinda slowly returned to normal. But for Madame Ifyananya, nothing was ever the same again. The woman who once walked proudly through the market in shiny clothes and expensive jewelry now moved like a shadow. People who once envied her no longer greeted her. Shopkeepers pretended not to see her. Neighbors turned away, and children whispered behind her back. The same villagers she mocked and looked down on now treated her as if she did not exist. Her laughter, once loud and boastful, was gone. In its place was silence and loneliness. Meanwhile, Camau's children blossomed like seeds planted in good soil. With the farmland left to them, Oba worked hard to rebuild the crops, providing food not just for themselves but for many families in Sinda. Injeri managed the businesses wisely, reopening shops and creating jobs, earning respect for her leadership. Little Kalechi, though still young, was loved by the community and seen as a bright hope for the future. Together, the siblings carried their father's name with honor, proving that his legacy had not been lost. The villagers often spoke with pride about them. "Camau's spirit must be smiling," they said. "His children are truly his greatest treasure." One quiet evening, the three of them stood by their father's grave. The sun was setting, painting the sky with gold and red. They held hands, their hearts filled with both sorrow and peace. Injeri bent down and whispered softly, her voice trembling but strong, "Thank you, Papa. You never forgot us." Oba and Kalechi nodded, tears in their eyes. In that moment, they knew their father's love had guided them even after his death. Justice had been served, and his memory would live on through them.